In this video, I'm going to talk about the AsyncTask class. So if you go to the developer's website, you'll see that the AsyncTask enables proper and easy use of the user interface thread. Now, this class allows you to perform background operations and publish the results on the user interface thread without having to manipulate threads or handlers. Now you can see an asynchronous task is defined by computation that runs on a background thread and whose result is published on the user interface thread. So an asynchronous task is defined by three generic types called params, progress, and result, and we're going to look at that now. And four steps called the onPre-execute, actually going into the background or doing background method. onProgress update while you're in the background, updating some progress bar. And then the onPost-execute. So I'm going to look at the AsyncTask class for this video and see how we can run some specific tasks in the background instead of slowing down the user interface on the main thread of your application. So I'm going to go to Android Studio now. Now I've done a small application here just to show you how it works and what is the problem actually. So you'll see there in this application, we roll the dice. So let's say we want to roll the dice 1,000 times. So we run a for loop and we'll look at the coding now. So if I roll the dice, it will create random numbers every time the for loop runs and tells me out of the 1,000 times I've rolled the dice, how many times it was a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 6. So it's quite easy coding. If you look at the activity main XML, we've got an edit text that asks the user for how many times did they roll the dice. We've got the button. If he clicks it, we give the results on the text view. So if you look at the coding in the main activity, we've set up all the components, make links to them, set the button up so that when it gets clicked, it goes to the onClick method. Then I declared variables for every single value that you can get, either 1 or a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or a 6. And we use these variables to count the number of times that we got a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4 or 5 or a 6. Then the number of times is what the user typed. So we get whatever the user typed by using et number times. So that will be this edit text, et number times. .getText.toString. The trim method just removes white space at the beginning and at the end. And because we want to use this as an integer, I'm taking that string that the user typed, which will be a number in any case, but it will be a string number, convert that string to an integer, and then save it into number of times. And then that's the number of times we will run the for loop. Okay, we'll get back to that now. Then I use the random class in order to create a random number. I'll just declare the results variable there. And then in the for loop, we start at 0 up until the number of times that the user indicated, which means that this for loop will run the exact same number of times as the user entered in the edit text. Now, every time it runs, we need to create a new random number, and that's simulating rolling a dice, for example. So there's the random object that we created. So on that random object, we call .nextInt and we pass in a 6. Now the 6 just means there it's going to return me a random number between 0 and 6, where 0 is included and 6 is not included, which means I'm going to get the values 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So if I put a +1 there, instead of starting at 0, it will start at 1. And instead of ending at 5, it will end at 6. So this will give me then, this line there with the +1, will give me a random value between 1 and 6, where 1 and 6 is actually included. So basically values on a dice. So if we get the random number every time this loop runs, we pass that random number into the switch. If it's a 1, we increment the 1s. If it's a 2, we increment the 2s. If it's a 3, we increment the 3s. If it's a 4, we increment the 4s. If it's a 5, we increment the 5s. And then if it's not a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, it must be a 6. So then we increment the 6s as the default. After this for loop, we can then set up the results variable. So we'll say results 1 and show the number of 1s, 2 and the number of 2s, and so forth. And then on TV results, we set the result and we show it those that the process is done. So let's just look at this again. So if I type 1,000, it means this loop will run 1,000 times. and then show process done. So that was quite quick. If I put another 0 there, also very quick. Let's put another 0 there. Not that bad. Put another 0 there. Also fast enough. And now if I start adding zeros, you'll see it gets slower and slower. So if I now click it, it takes about, I think, 5 seconds before it will be done with this one. So let me just click this one again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So basically 5 seconds before it's done. Now if I click another 0 there, now I'm running this loop really a lot of times. Now I've clicked the button, and if I try to click on the edit text, nothing is responding. So it seems to the user as if this application that we're currently running is actually not responding. And even the Android system will pop up and say, you know what, this one isn't responding. What do you want to do? So I'll say wait, because I know actually this thing is doing some work in the background. Or not in the background, in this case, in the user interface thread, and that's why the whole thing is hanging now. And even the Android system picks it up. So we do not want to have this happen for any one of our users. There's the second time it pops up this thing. So I'm going to say wait again, because this, at the end, this one will actually give me process done like it did now. So now we're back at the user interface and I can start using it again. But we don't want that for the user. So that's why we need the AsyncTask class. So the AsyncTask class will help us to run this whole process of the for loop in the background thread, which means it's not going to be in the same thread as the user interface, but on the user interface we'll show a very nice looking progress bar to the user to see how far are we with the whole process. Okay, so let's get into this quickly. So just after this on-click listener, I'm just going to take away this emulator. Let's see how we can do this whole thing now in the background. So just after this onCreate, let's do it after the onCreate method. We're going to create an inner class. And this class, you can call whatever you want. So I'm going to say public class, and I'm going to call this class process dice in background. So remember, you can call this thing anything you want. So I'm going to say extends then, because we need to extend this to make it a specific class we want to use. And the class we want to use is the AsyncTask class. And you can see there's the three that we also saw on the website that says params, progress, and result. So the first argument there, params, will be what you're passing into this AsyncTask class. And we'll look at that later on. And that will also be the value that goes into the do in background method. And then the progress is the one of how you're going to keep track of the progress by what type of variable you're going to use. And normally we use an integer there. And then the result is what you will return after this class is done. Now in this case, we want to return this results of ours. So we'll keep it as a string. So let's just see this again. It's AsyncTask, that's the one I want to use. So for the first one, I'm going to indicate the type should be an integer. So that's the value we're going to pass in. Then the second one there will also be an integer, and that's how I'm going to keep my my progress bar up and running with integers. And then the last one there will be a string. And that's the value we will be returning. So we'll look at those three now again. So then there's a few methods that we must have, and you can see it wants that do in background method. So let's go to code and override methods. So another way of doing that is just right clicking and say generate override methods. And then you get to the same menu. So there's the async task, the on pre-execute. You remember from the website we had an on pre-execute, on post-execute, on progress update, and the do in background. So we want all of those. So the first method that usually runs, or that actually runs inside of the async task, is the on pre-execute method. So let's just add that one first. And then the second method that runs after the on pre-execute, let's just go to override methods again, will be the do in background method. So it will be on pre-execute, then do in background. And then while we're in the background, we will have another method there called on progress update to update the progress bar. And then we'll have the last method that will run there which will be the onPostExecute method. So basically, when this class starts running, it goes into onPreExecute, then it goes to doInBackground, and while you're in doInBackground, you use the onProgressUpdate method to update your progress bar, and then we go into onPostExecute when we're done. So an important part to know here is that the onPreExecute and the onPostExecute methods actually runs in the normal user interface thread, which means it's not in the background. Whereas the method doInBackground is in the background, and you cannot update the graphical user interface or the interface where your application is actually running, the one that the user sees. You cannot update it from here, but you can actually use this method to update the progress bar that's already running. That's the only way to update. So let's just look at this again. This integer that we had there will then be the integer that will be passed to the doInBackground method. So whatever the value is that you want to pass in, that's the type. The type that you're going to pass in will be an integer. And then the second one there, this integer type, is whatever you're going to use for this onProgressUpdate. So this one is also an integer. And then the last one there, the string there, indicates what you're returning in the doInBackground method. And the nice thing about the doInBackground method, when it returns the string, in this case the null there, it will return the string to the onPostExecute method, and there the string will be. So whatever you return in the doInBackground method will fall into the onPostExecute, and you can start doing something with it right there. Okay, so now what we want to do in this class, when it starts, we want to start showing a progress dialog. So I'm going to say progress dialog and just call it dialog. Now in the onPreExecute, that's where we want to start showing it. So normally we start showing the progress dialog in the onPreExecute, just before going into the background, post after you've been in the background. So before we go into the background, we'll start showing the progress dialog. When we're done in the background, we'll stop showing it in the onPostExecute. So let's set up the dialog there. So it's going to be progress dialog equals new progress dialog. And then what it accepts is the context. So we're just going to say main activity.this, which means we want to show this progress dialog over the main activity. Then on this object, let's call the set progress style. And the style that we want to use here is the style horizontal. So we're going to have this progress bar as a horizontal progress bar. Then also we're going to use the method setMax to set the maximum number for this progress bar, and we'll see when it starts running what is this maximum value. But the maximum value, we want to basically have whatever the user typed as the number of times that we should run this loop. That should be our value that we have there for the maximum value. So I'm just going to copy this quickly. I'm going to take that whole part there. Let's take it until there, copy, go there and set that as the max. So whatever the user typed there in the edit text, convert it to an integer, that will be the maximum value of my progress dialog. And then if you're done setting it up, you can just call dialog.show, which will start showing the dialog. And then when you're done in the onPostExecute, just remember to go and say dialog.dismiss, so that it actually stops showing when you're done in the background. So that's very important. So if you ever get your progress dialog that doesn't go away, then it's probably because you haven't dismissed it in the onPostExecute. So remember, the onPreExecute and the onPostExecute is part of the main user interface thread, doesn't run in the background, so that's where you'll show your dialog and where you'll dismiss it, and then set the text or whatever you want to do. Okay, so now the next part is to actually use the doInBackground method. So if I go to the top now, so I want this whole part there. Let's take everything there up until there. Copy that, and that's the part that I want to do inside of the doInBackground method. So in the doInBackground method, I'm going to start with declaring all the 1s, 2s, 3s, and so forth. We need to remove this one line there. We'll get back to that one. And then we'll change the number of times now as well. So we're going to keep all those declarations. We keep the random number. We keep the for loop that runs and actually creates the random number the whole time. And then there's the result, and then we will just return that results. Okay, so basically the same as what we did now. It's just different values that we need to return or send into. So what we want to get now here in this part is the number of times that this loop should run. Okay, so let me just show you how do you pass something into the do in background method. So now let's go to this one quickly. I'm going to delete this line. And all the rest. I just want that one line there. So let's just delete all the rest. So basically now when we click the button, we're just going to get the number of times that the user wants to roll the dice. And now we must call this process dice in background. So what we're going to do is to call new process dice in background. That's the class that we want to call. And then you call dot execute. Now, if you look at your AsyncTask class again, that first declaration is of type integer. And that's the integer that will be passed into the do in background. So that's the value that you've got there. So integer is the type of what you pass in there, but it's also the type that you must use here. So in this case, we want to pass in that number of times. Now the nice thing here, you can see that the do in background accepts an integer params. Now what is this 3 dots there? It means that this params is an array of type integer that can accept any number of values as well as you pass it into the array. So I can use the number of times, comma 1, comma 2, comma 3. So I'm passing in different values there, 1, 2, 3, 4 values. And in params, position number 0 will be number of times. Position number 1 will be 1. Position number 2 will be 2. Position number 3 will be 3. So it depends on what you want to pass in to this specific execute method. Okay, so just doing this, process dice in background, execute, passing in number of times. So that number of times must be of type integer. And then that's also what we're passing in there. So where will I get this number of times now? I will get that in the params array. So I'm going to refer to it there as params and then going to position 0. Because I'm only passing in one value, that one value will be in params position 0. Okay, so now the for loop should actually work because we've got that specific number of times that the user wants to roll the dice. So the for loop will run for that number of times, and then when it's done, it will say results equals this, return the results. And where does the result then return to? It will return to the onPost execute method, and it will be saved into S. Okay, so let's just set up that one quickly. So on TV results then, we want to set the text, and that text should be the S that was passed through. So remember, this is in the main user interface thread again. So that S will be the results that we returned there in the do in background method. So the do in background returns back to the onPost execute, and that's the result we want to set to the text view. Okay, so now the last thing that I want to quickly show you is how to use the progress bar now and how to update it. So if you go to just before the for loop, I'm going to declare 2 variables there. I'm going to have a double current progress, and we're going to set that one to 0. And I'm going to have another double, which will be previous progress, in order to keep on updating our specific progress bar. So if we go then into the for loop, we will calculate now the current progress. So when the for loop starts running, the current progress, let's see if you agree with what I'm going to say now here. The current progress will be, remember that param 0 is the number of times we want to roll the dice. So if it's the very first time that runs, it's going to be actually the 0 out of the number of times we're going to run this. So the current progress will be basically the I there divided by params 0. So every time the loop runs, if it's the first iteration, the second one, I will be 1. So it's 1 out of, let's say you want to run it 100 times, then it's 1 out of 100, then 2 out of 100, then 3 out of 100, and so it carries on, just to get the current progress of where we are at. But because this is an integer and that's an integer, just be careful of integer division there. So I'm just going to convert that I to a double. Okay, so now we've got the current progress. So where the loop is at for that specific position divided by the number of times, that's our progress. So now we can go and test. And this is just to make your progress bar, not make your application actually slower than it's supposed to be, because you can actually slow down the whole process by showing a progress bar. So this if statement helps you a bit to not slow it down too much. So I'm going to say if the current progress minus the previous progress, which in this case is 0. So for the first time, that one will be 0. And then we're going to say if it's greater than or equal 0.02, which means that we actually want to update the progress bar every 2%. 0.02 is basically 2%. So every 2% that your application is done in the for loop, we want to actually start progress or displaying that specific progress. So then we'll just call publish progress. And now we're going to pass in the value of I to publish this specific value. So wherever we are now in the for loop, we will start progressing or publishing that. And then we will say, well, then the previous progress should now be whatever the current progress is. And then we carry on the for loop increments. Current progress is again this, but we've got the previous progress by assigning it to the current one now. Okay, so now we've got publish progress there. Now this publish progress method calls this on progress update. And now again, the value that you're using here, that I, is of type, what you've indicated there is the second one. So it must be of type integer, and you can also see that this on progress update is also of type integer. So if I'm saying publish progress I, that I will be passed into values at position 0, and I can now use it here. So the only thing I want to do here is to go to that dialog object and call set progress, and I want to set the progress to this values array at position 0, and now it will set the progress. So there's another way you can also do this by saying .set, or maybe not set, let's just say increment progress by. So you can say increment progress by, and then you can maybe add a 1 there, so it keeps on incrementing it by 1 or whatever you want to do. In this example, I'm just going to say set the progress to the value that I'm passing through. So we're basically passing through the I value where we are in the loop at this stage. So let's just quickly run this and see how it works on the emulator. Okay, so let's say we're going to do a 10,000 there, roll the dice. You can see if I click it, we've seen that progress bar now very, very fast. Let's just add another 0 there. You can see there's the progress bar. It starts showing, but it's really too fast to actually show that progress bar. So if I put another 0 there, also very fast. Again, there I can see something happening. Okay, now let's add another 0. And now you can see the progress bar actually running. So if you remember for this one, it actually took us 5 seconds. So let's just count down this again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or maybe 6 seconds. So if it's taking too long, you can actually go to this value there and make it, let's make it a 3 there, which means we're not updating the progress bar as often. Okay then, and another thing that we can do there is to just show a toast when we're done. So we'll show the toast also there in the on post execute. We'll show the toast. And maybe just say process done, something like that. And that will just help the user to also see, okay, we're done, rolling the dice. So you can see there the text view there that we've got there. We don't want to show text view right at the start. So what we can do there is to, just after declaring and setting up TV results, the text view, we can call set visibility and pass in view.gone, which will take away that text view totally. And then when we want to start displaying the results, we can call tvresults.setVisibility again and call view.visible, which will start showing it again. So let's stop again, play it. Okay, now you can see the text view is gone. So if I start typing 10,000, roll the dice, then it starts showing the text view again. So thank you for watching the video. I hope you've learned something from this video.